I'm going to talk to the role of evidence in helping in innovation and scaling. So the first message I think I would give is that sound innovation always relies on sound technical evidence. So this is the challenge of evidence, that it can appear extremely persuasive if you believe in your innovation and are resistant to scrutiny. The practice of bloodletting, as you know, went on well into the 20th century and was implicated in the death of many, including Charles II, which was a gallstone of goats, after which His Majesty died. So here we have something that was applied according to nice guidelines, presumably of the day, but was completely wrong. And sadly, we still see examples of where the technical innovation is widely promoted, but is completely wrong. A good example of this in recent times was beta blockade in surgery, but the early trials were wrong, and in fact it increases rather than decreasing mortality. And some of the job of innovators is to accept that and to recognise that some of the pushback may be legitimate, but also to be very clear about where the evidence is for the innovation so that you can be convincing and persuasive about the scientific basis. The second thing that is then key about rolling out innovations and promoting their uptake is that you need something that we would call a program theory. The technical one may be a very key element of the intervention, but it's almost never enough on its own to make the improvement or to secure implementation. There's always going to be social elements, behavioural elements, emotional elements, organisational elements. Telemonitoring is a classic example. This study from Yale, for example, telemonitoring in patients in heart failure, it was the behavioural elements of this that scuppered it, not the fact that it was a technical intervention that wasn't working. The third thing with innovation is the necessity to keep monitoring the data, because that will change over time. And again, if I can return to my own home, so now we have a scientist's dream, controlled conditions during which I could monitor the data. And so I did this for several weeks and was able to discover that the person who leaves the cap off the toothpaste is me. So this is why having high quality, locally relevant data is absolutely essential. Things that mean things to the people who are actually faced with the challenge. You've got to do it if you're going to myth bust, and you've got to provide a baseline for improvement so people can actually see how they're improving over time in response to innovation. The fourth thing then is tackling failures of description. This study done by my PhD student looked at how innovations and improvements in surgical pathways were being described in perioperative care, and basically they were mostly so poorly described you have no hope of ever reproducing them. And one of the most important things they said is that that they allowed modifications to fit local population, culture and workflow. I'm going to conclude by saying that some of what we need to do to get innovation and improvement really working is to abandon the idea it is about scaling up, or it is about local improvements, that they're always going to be important concepts. But some of what we need to do is actually start understanding that healthcare is a sector, and that it's not simply a series of individual organisations. Similarly, we're seeing things like people beginning to use labelling systems that aren't standardised or harmonised throughout. And that introduces all kinds of new risks, but it leads to a lot of waste. We see a lot of wheels being reinvented. I'll finish by mentioning the most exciting thing, at least from my point of view, that's going to happen in this space, which is that next year we're going to be launching the Healthcare Improvement Studies Institute, funded by an extraordinary award by the Health Foundation. That's going to be led out of Cambridge, but it's going to be nationally facing, very NHS facing, extremely practical. And our job is going to be producing evidence to support improvement. It's going to have a big fellowship programme, which will be open to all UK universities, but will convene in Cambridge. And we hope that through creating an evidence base, we're going to take on some of these big and hairy problems and see the end of them. Thank you very much.